Dispatch, everybody's choice for 2025's Best Superhero Workplace Comedy Episodic Adventure/Strategy Game Award. And I mean, yeah, if you invent such a niche category like Superhero Workplace Comedy, you're bound to be the best in that field. Oh wait! Also, just so you know, this video does contain spoilers for literally the entire game. This is not a spoiler-free review. If you haven't already watched somebody play this game, go do that, and then come back here if you don't want spoilers. I've had my eye on this game for a while. I originally saw it revealed alongside a slew of other games during 2024's Game of the Year Awards, and it stood out to me because it seems like the devs for this game discovered what the color wheel was. The Game Awards is a show where nothing really that crazy ever gets revealed, usually all just being games that make me go, I swear I saw this 5 seconds ago. But every now and then they'll show a game or some kind of trailer that gets me interested. The Telltale style prompts come on screen. Cut to an office. Superheroes. Sucks to oh my god! Now I gotta play this game. They're speaking my language. Moist, Critical, Pac-Man, the rest of the cast. Eventually the game came out. I waited until all the episodes were out because I needed to waste my time on bigger and better things. Got a bunch of friends together and I left pretty disappointed. I would generally like to know what game the people who've been giving this game 5 out of 5s and 10 out of 10s have played, because I'm making the bold stance that it was just alright. Ad Hoc, those were the guys behind this game. They're a studio made up of a bunch of former Telltale and Ubisoft devs. Development on the game started as far back as 2018, where it was conceptualized to be some sort of interactive live-action TV show, but due to the pandemic they had to pivot. They were originally working on The Wolf Among Us 2 with Telltale, but you can guess how that went. They eventually returned to the idea of Dispatch after scrapping another project, but this time, it would be animated. They revealed the game during the 2024 Game Awards to garner more interest and secure more funding, but even that wasn't enough. It wasn't until the summer of 2025 though that Critical Role would partner with Ad Hoc to co-develop a game set in the Critical Role universe. And it was through this partnership, Ad Hoc was able to fund the final stage of development for Dispatch, with the game's first part releasing on October 22nd, 2025, with the rest of the game dropping in weekly intervals, with the last part dropping on November 12th, 2025. I think the weekly release thing was probably one of the smartest decisions Ad Hoc made when it came to this game. For 4 weeks, people had this game's story in the back of their minds, wondering where it could go and how their decisions would differ from others as more episodes dropped. Poor guys. And as I said earlier, I played this game once all episodes were released, so I was able to just jump from one episode to the next. And because of that, the cracks in the story became very apparent the more I played. Short summary of the game story: you play as my dream name, Robert Robertson III, aka Mecha Man, played by Jerry from Birds of Prey. As his name would suggest, he controls a giant mech that's powered by an Infinity Stone or something crazy like that, because apparently this thing's power source cannot be recreated. He gets beaten in a fight against a villain named Shroud, and the piece that makes it so his suit can function is lost. And because he's nothing without a suit, he is forced to retire from being a superhero and is later recruited by a company whose whole goal is to rehabilitate supervillains into heroes by, and get this, sitting behind a desk and dispatching them around the city. Oh my god! And this is where the bulk of the game takes place, and that's right, it's a strategy game, not a privilege. The dispatching segments will see you dispatching a limited number of heroes to deal with certain things. Each hero is an expert in a specific field from the start. Some excel in combat, while others may be super fast or have that Clinton charm. Certain scenarios require specific heroes with a good enough stat in order to complete, so you need to really read the prompts and figure out which hero to send out. After they complete a task, they'll have to return to base and rest up for a bit before you can use them again. And every so often, your heroes will rank up, allowing you to raise any stat for them, which gives you the choice of either trying to round out a hero to be a jack of all trades, master of none, or just go in on a particular couple of traits so they can be the best at what they do. This is probably the most your decisions will impact the game in any way, so try and appreciate this part of the game while it lasts. Sometimes certain scenarios will require you to hack things, and when this happens, you'll be thrown into a little mini-game that's surprisingly well thought out. Early versions of this mini-game will consist of you trying to get to the end, but as you progress further in the story, they'll get more difficult. The game will keep on adding additional elements to get in your way, such as inputting passwords, avoiding tracking enemies, flipping switches, and finding hidden exits, and most of the time, these will have timers. There's a point in the game where a bunch of enemies will chase after you, and you have to flip a bunch of switches in time so that you can defeat those pursuing enemies, since there is absolutely no way for you to combat or escape them otherwise. And this ends up being the running gimmick for this whole hacking segment, which is really cool. I like that. I really enjoyed this part of the game. It actually ends up being a pretty decent and well thought out strategy game. Trying to figure out the best heroes to send based on a couple of vague keywords while managing what heroes are and aren't out is pretty fun. Something I do kind of wish though was for it to be a bit more random. These segments are always scripted, the same scenarios will always show up in the same places no matter what, which is kind of disappointing that there isn't some level of randomization. Hell, it would have made total sense if certain scenarios played out depending on your actions in the story, but that's not what we got. On the other hand though, I can sort of see why these are all scripted. It makes it kind of feel like a high score kind of game. It's all about memorizing which events will happen, when and where, and figuring out the right heroes to send out and answering the right prompts. But I really wouldn't say this is a genius formula for a strategy game or anything like that. It's not like it's very deep or complex for this genre, and there are definitely better strategy games out there, but this is still a pretty fun one. But waiter, please! Somebody put a video game in my glorified visual novel! Please, dispose of it immediately! But yeah, now I have to talk about the other part of this game, because nobody cares about the part of the game that it gets its name from. No, we want to experience the Telltale-style story! For a while, most superhero media kind of focused on building the world around a hero. You're introduced to the hero, you get their origin story, and as that story progresses, you meet more characters and villains, and the universe reacts to what that hero does. But superheroes are so mainstream today that there is a new writing style associated with heroes. The general public is already familiar with how superhero stories play out. They know what an origin story is. So what if instead of building up a world and seeing how it evolves, what if we just threw the audience into the middle of the action, show them this brand new world that already has things going on, and instead see how it reacts when new and unexpected things are thrown into the equation? Dispatch tries this method to tell a story, but I don't really think it works that well. When throwing the audience into a pre-established world, you're supposed to get more information and context as the story goes on. You learn more about the world and characters simply through passing conversation. I know almost nothing about Dispatch's characters and even less about its world. There is almost no information given about the world outside of the office Robert works in and the villain bar he sometimes goes to. And even then, I still know very little about those locations. Why does this bar cater to villains? What does the Red Ring even do? Waterboy says he looks up to Phenomenon. Why is this? Does he simply think he's cool, or is there something else to it? I know Punch Up and Coup are friends. Want to expand on that a bit more? Maybe tell me why? Oh wait, it's explained in the comic that's in the digital deluxe edition? Shh, my bad. I don't know anything about these characters, which is a huge problem. Video games as a medium do not have to be as reliant on having an engaging story like books or film do. As long as the game is fun and uses the medium effectively, it can get by with some truly abysmal storytelling. Characters are what really drive video game narratives, as you spend more time with characters in games than you do in books or movies, and most players will grow a deep attachment to characters in these games simply because they're controlling them. It feels like you're right there with them on their journey. And this is only amplified by the fact that you as a player have agency over these characters. Everybody talks about Winston, but nobody talks about why Winston, you know? Characters, or sometimes lack of, are incredibly important when it comes to your enjoyment of a game's narrative. Usually because you're going to spend over 20 hours, hell, sometimes over 60 with some of these as opposed to the 3 hours you'll spend with characters in a movie. And I'm not saying games can't have phenomenal stories and that they have to exclusively focus on characters, because that is not true at all. But games usually don't have to be as reliant on having a great story as long as either the game is fun or it has memorable characters you enjoy spending time with. I'm bringing this all up because even though I think Dispatch's story sucks, I could have forgiven it if I at least cared about the characters at all. Gun to my head, if you ask me to tell you anything about Golem's character, well, I'd sure as well try, because damn, that's a gun. I feel no attachment to these characters at all, and I believe that's something a lot of people probably feel too, but they'll either hear Critical's funny voice or take a look at Malevola's abs and deny their true feelings. I think this game definitely could have benefited from an explorable environment. Let me walk around the office as Rob and talk to these characters so I can have short conversations with them, so that way I can get to know more about them. Or hell, just give them more screen time, because I know there's absolutely enough screen time for these characters, but they went all in on Invisigal, who herself is very much a character you'll either love or despise. I am a blonde blazer truther. You can infer what I think about Invisigal from that statement. I think the acting is pretty good. Everybody does a pretty good job of bringing these characters to life. Despite hearing Jacksepticeye's voice come out of Punch Up, I never really registered it as Jacksepticeye while I was playing. But the actual game story itself, yeah, it really does kind of suck. I do not think this game needed a villain first off. I think if this game was mainly just about Rob and his growing relationship with the team, ultimately ending with them stopping some kind of minor threat as a team, I think that would have been fine. But then they throw Shroud in at the last second. He shows up in the villain bar and goes, "I'm Shroud." And suddenly the game is asking me to remember and now care about the relationship between Rob and Shroud, despite the fact I haven't seen him since the first 10 minutes of the first episode. And how am I supposed to take him seriously or feel threatened at all by him when he straight up hasn't had a single mention since that initial first episode? I only know Shroud is the guy that broke Rob's suit. Why is the game acting like he's a super dangerous threat who's had tons of buildup? Even just mentioning him every now and again would have went a long way to give him more presence. I wasn't surprised when they revealed who Shroud was. I was surprised because I didn't even know he was still going to be in the game. And I think another problem with this game is just general pacing, as dispatching sequences take longer than the actual Telltale portions, which this game put all of its marketing into. They probably spend 20 minutes on the story in each episode, max 30 minutes. And I think each episode definitely needed to be longer, or there should have at least been a couple more episodes because again, we spend very little time with the rest of the characters and zero time with the villains. And the writing in general is kind of a mixed bag as well. Ad Hoc said they were inspired by The Bear, a show that is in fact a drama but still knows how to tell a couple of jokes. I don't know what version of The Bear they watched though, because this game feels almost entirely comedic. And obviously comedy is subjective, and to be honest, I found the game funny at times, and other times I didn't find it funny, like at all. It definitely feels like a millennial trying to write dialogue in order to appeal to what they think the Gen Z mindset is. I shit you not, there is a big Chungus reference on a board in this game. And even though I hate it when people describe something as Reddit, I will let those allegations slide for this game. And I love Jeffrey Wright as an actor, and that kind of makes me sad that I didn't really like his character in this game. Maybe if he didn't come out of the gate reading off a Has-Been Hotel script, I would have liked his character a lot more. Also, Chase needed to die, or at the very least they should have made scenarios where Chase lives and dies depending on your actions. And this game is just way too horny. Most jokes in this game are HR violations. I enjoy crude humor every now and then, but when every joke is just characters sexually harassing one another, the crude humor starts to lose its luster. And then there's Invisigal. I hate Invisigal. But before I go into that, I need to talk about this game's most egregious crime: sucking at being a choose-your-own-adventure Telltale game. Someone I know really put this into perspective when they said that this game feels like the kind of game Telltale in their final years would make. Right before Telltale was going under, they just kept releasing games that had anywhere between subpar and straight up bad writing, mixed with choices and decisions the player can make that ultimately meant nothing. Dispatch feels like one of those games. Not a single one of your choices matter in a game that's supposed to have your decisions impact the story. That's not true. You can burn Flambe's eyebrows off, but even that doesn't matter because he grows them back in the next episode. I think the best example of this is the scene where you can choose to reveal Rob's identity as Mecha Man to his team, because if you don't reveal his identity, nothing happens. But if you do reveal it, Flambe lashes out and leaves, only to come back 5 seconds later after being visited by 3 ghosts, saying he's sorry for no reason other than for the game to return to the status quo. You can clearly tell that there is a right and a wrong choice that the developers intended. Take for example the choice between choosing to add Phenomenon or Waterboy to your team. For context, at the end of the game, whoever you didn't choose will show up for the final dispatch mission regardless, so that choice earlier also meant jack shit. But if you choose Phenomenon early on, he is a much higher rank than what your team will be at the time, versus if you choose Waterboy, will be around your team's level. If you choose Phenomenon, an incredibly underleveled Waterboy will join you for the final dispatch mission, and is pretty much useless for a majority of it because he is so underleveled. But it's very clear the devs wanted you to choose Waterboy early on, so that way he can be the correct rank for the final dispatch mission, and Phenomenon would show up with his rank being closer to what your team is during the final mission. One of the only choices that actually matters in this game is choosing who to cut from your team, Coup or Sonar, and this is by far the best choice in the game simply because it matters. It not only affects the story, but also the gameplay, as whoever you choose to cut, you won't have them for the rest of the game when it comes to those dispatching sequences. On my initial playthrough, I chose to keep Sonar, because he was basically 2 characters with how he switches between 2 different builds, but I really liked using Coup early on in the game. And because I liked using both characters equally, it ended up making that decision pretty hard for me. But even this decision, the devs seem to have had an intended answer for you to make, as if you cut Sonar, forgiving him at the end of the game makes a whole lot more sense than forgiving Coup, since Sonar makes it very clear that he was hurt after being cut from the team, as opposed to Coup, who just kind of yells and fights you. I think it would have been really cool if the decisions made in certain scenes affected the dispatching segments a lot more. Maybe pissing off certain characters make them less obedient in the dispatching segments, or maybe failing to prevent certain things in the dispatching segments can result in new dialogue outside of those segments. This was also a lie though, because there is in fact something that happens in the dispatching segments that affects the story, but it really sucks because it's just a small change to the ending and nothing else really. Plus there are no hints or indications that this can or will happen. Basically, if you don't use Invisigal all that much during the dispatching segments, there's a chance that in the game's ending she'll go back to being a villain, which is by far one of the dumbest things about this game. I do not like people giving this game's lack of choices a pass because all Telltale games were like that, because that's just not true. I'm not expecting Detroit Become Human levels of choices matter, because expecting that out of a new studio is frankly ridiculous. But there are so many other games where making choices take a back seat, and those games have better consequences regarding your choices than the game that is advertising itself as having you make important decisions. But yeah, only 3 decisions actually matter when it comes to the game's story, and I've already named 2 of them, and you can tell that the devs clearly intended certain decisions to be made, but I think the absolute most egregious example of this is the romance decision, choosing between Blonde Blazer or Invisigal, which leads me to the larger problem of this game, that being Invisigal. First off, this romance is kind of bullshit, as they clearly want you to romance Invisigal with just how much screen time she has in the game compared to Blonde Blazer, a character who ends up disappearing from the story quite a bit, and no, dating Blonde Blazer does not give her any additional screen time. But regardless if you choose to romance Invisigal or not, she is still very clearly the intended romance option, as episode 3 literally opens on a horny dream sequence with her for no reason other than for her and Rob to sexually harass each other in the following scenes. There's also that not very well written scene of her sharing how she has a resentment for her powers, and the reason she gives is by far one of the dumbest things imaginable. She states that powers dictate a person's moral trajectory and that the power of invisibility is inherently an evil power. And that whole mentality sort of just falls apart when you realize just how many superheroes have invisibility powers that are good and how little villains there are with that same power. The speech could have worked if they just gave her a different power, maybe something that relates to shadows or poison, mind control, I don't know. But I'm sorry, I'm stupid. The game clearly tells me I'm in the wrong for telling my boss that she assaulted me, and if I choose too many negative decisions regarding her, that I neglected her, a 30-year-old criminal. Invisigal is absolutely the main thing that drives this game down, for me at least. It's a very character-driven game, and by very character-driven, I mean just Robin and Invisigal, and if you're not attached to them specifically, you're probably still going to like this game. It has most criticals at bat. This game probably didn't even need to be about superheroes. None of the dispatch crew even look like superheroes at all, and you see so few and little of them. With a bit of work, you could probably theme this game to something else like firefighters or something. And lastly, as I'm editing this, the Switch version of the game finally released, and it is by far the worst way to play this game simply because of the censorship. Censorship isn't new to Switch or even console ports of other games, but what makes this version so bad though is that they didn't even bother trying to fix it at all. When Dispatch released, it already had a censored option on PC, but it wasn't that great. It would constantly bleep swear words and add black bars over just random things. But what makes the censorship even worse is it doesn't even really censor things that should have been censored, like the Invisigal dream sequence only having muted audio, when it probably should have just been removed entirely or had something else put there in its place. A lot of people chalk this up to Nintendo censoring the game just because they're a family-friendly company, but I knew there was something going on with this game, especially when you consider that Cyberpunk on Switch 2 lets you swing your Edge Runner around with zero consequences or censorship. There's also the fact that Nintendo even publishes the Bayonetta series, and this isn't even mentioning all the garbage that floods the Switch eShop. Now, Nintendo did respond to this whole situation incredibly fast, with them pretty much saying, "We have no idea what they're doing, stop emailing us." So this is pretty much an ad hoc problem, and as someone who watches this industry like a hawk, I'm almost positive that this is likely due to Japan's age rating system. Because if you don't know, Sirei is a lot more strict than ESRB or PEGI, though I don't really think that may be the case anymore. And it's likely that because of Sirei not wanting to slap a rating on this game because of all the nudity, that Ad Hoc chose to release Dispatch as one version across the entire world, as making separate versions for different territories would have costed them more money. But it still doesn't excuse just how terrible this censored version is. There are so many instances of things that didn't need censorship being censored, and things that definitely should have had more censorship not having much done to them. They definitely should have went back in and fixed a lot of these changes, but I guess it'd be pretty hard to do when your entire game is just MP4 files. The censored version of this game shouldn't have even been censored like this from the start. I can't even make the excuse that at least it's more accessible now. This is not a good way to play the game at all. No disrespect to everyone who worked on this game, except for everybody who wrote this game. I would love to see Ad Hoc grow and evolve with subsequent games. If you love this game, that is fine, have fun with it. But from what I played and the price tag of $30, I do not think that this game is worth it. I did not enjoy the game as much as I would have wanted to. I like the strategy elements, but I wasn't really there for the strategy elements, and I'm sure most people weren't either. So I'll just end this by saying that if you want to play a Telltale-inspired superhero game, just go and play the actual superhero games made by Telltale.